if you're going to be a curator, one cannot be too sensitive about bad reviews. One has to start with the assumption that you know more than they do, and so you forgive them.
Hi, welcome back. John Szarkowski has been called the most influential figure within photography during the 20th century. Between 1962 and 1991, he was the primary decision maker about which photographs appeared on the walls of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It's rare for one person to dominate a medium so completely, but for 3 decades he did just that. He was chosen by Edward Steichen to take over the Department of Photography at MoMA when he was 36 years old. Steichen was impressed by his confidence, forcefulness, even though he was known to be a prickly character. Alfred Stieglitz, then Steichen, had fought to elevate photography's status to that of a genuine art form. When Szarkowski became the director of photography, there wasn't a single commercial gallery in New York exhibiting photography. Through his vision and persistent drive, he managed to simultaneously create and educate an audience for photography. One of his books, called Looking at Photographs, is still a masterclass in interpreting images. He chose 100 pictures from the MoMA collection and wrote a short essay on each of them. US News and World Report said his thinking, whether Americans know it or not, has become our thinking about photography. He studied art history and became a talented photographer in his own right. Most of the images that I've included in this video are his. He was initially drawn to architectural photography and produced a book on one of America's most respected architects, Louis Sullivan. It was a difficult decision for Szarkowski to put his own work aside and take the job at MoMA, but he thought that he would give it a go for a year or two. He ended up in the position for 29 years. Just before he left Wisconsin to take up the job, an acquaintance said that it sounded like he was trading in his shotgun for a game warden's license. And that was probably pretty much what he faced when he took up this position. There was very little structure at the time within the photography world. Szarkowski was intelligent, had strong opinions, and was highly articulate. And he set about introducing the idea of analyzing and drawing attention to what the photographer was doing. He was demonstrating the complex nature of photograph making. The act of picture making for him was often as interesting or more than the subject itself. While he expanded the reputations of established photographers like Walker Evans, Edward Weston, he was also seeking out the new photographic innovators. He pretty much launched the careers of Diane Arbus, William Eggleston, Lee Freelander, Gary Winogrand, and many others. Stephen Shaw, in his recent memoir, said that Szarkowski was his primary guide in photography. Broadly speaking, Szarkowski was honing down a path of the essence of where photography was and where it was going.
I think there were things that John took a bead on that were in the essential qualities of what photography really was about. And then he opened that up. And it was in that opening, just a little wedge, in the rest of this mundane use of photography. And that little wedge was filled with oxygen. And it was the thing that gave us all courage.
He created an open door policy at the museum, which allowed photographers to present their portfolios of work. He then managed to absorb all that was going on and get a big picture, and at the same time focus attention onto the photographic currents that he thought had growth potential. He was extremely courteous to all photographers, whether they were famous or unknown. Joel Meyerowitz said that he spoke to photographers as if they were intelligent. So while he was building and educating an audience for photography, he was simultaneously encouraging photographers to appreciate the significance of their practice and to value their achievements as artists.
John Szarkowski's exhibitions were nothing if not superbly intelligent and cogently edited. There was never a picture too many. If anything, we sometimes left an exhibition of Szarkowski's with the sense that it was so good, why didn't it go on just a little bit longer? He was an extraordinary thinker about photography, and the way he thought about the pictures is how he hung the pictures, and therefore he drew from his audience the sense that they too were as bright and as interested in photography as the man who'd put the pictures on the wall. So there's a kind of intimacy of dialogue in a Szarkowski exhibition, which is ultimately very rewarding to the public.
He didn't rate photographic education very highly. In fact, he thought that it could harm creativity because it would constrain the breadth of one's vision to what had already been achieved. He preferred the idea that life experience was what provided the best grounding for photographers. He thought that self-examination and exploration of the world was what really drove individual vision. Ultimately, he believed that having something to say was the most important thing, and then sticking with it until one learned how to express one's ideas. Szarkowski was aware that much of the history of photography had been made up of photographers recognizing the brilliant work of others and bringing it to the fore. He spoke of Ansel Adams, who in 1936 discovered the work made by the 19th century photographer Timothy O'Sullivan. Adams showed this work to Stieglitz, who in turn made it available to a wider audience. Photographers are normally lone wolves and are often highly competitive. But these tendencies are usually put aside when we recognize that exceptional work is being ignored. Szarkowski used his position at MoMA to facilitate this process. When Diane Arbus initially took her portfolio to MoMA, he appreciated her and her dedication to her work, but didn't feel that at that stage she had found her unique photographic voice. He told her that he didn't think her images reflected the subject matter that she was interested in. He tried to explain in words what he felt was missing in her images. Then intuitively showed her the work of August Sander, as well as a book containing Darius Kinsey's logging portraits. This was a transformational moment for Arbus. She recognized that these honest and solemn portraits revealed the subjects having a sense of purpose. As Arbus's ideas expanded and she assimilated these ideas, her work took on a similar matter-of-factness. What Szarkowski meant about sense of purpose, one can see in the giants and the transvestites that she photographed. The nature of what it is to be a giant or a transvestite. In the same way as Kinsey's loggers and Sander's pastry chef aren't trying to be anything different or anything more than who they are. MoMA was the only institution that paid her work any serious attention during her lifetime, and that was largely due to Szarkowski.
The influence that she's had has been simply enormous, because when all of us, when we first looked at Diane's pictures, it was almost as though we were starting again, as though we were back in the days of the daguerreotype, or back in the days of Matthew Brady, and it was a new, fresh, unused medium again. All the fanciness had been stripped away, and all that was left was the more marvelous, clear, airless experience of life.
He said that he felt most unprepared when he was confronted with Gary Winogrand's work. Through Szarkowski's own development as a photographer and his grounding in the history of photography, he had come to accept certain rules and norms that were bound to the medium. On the surface, Winogrand's work seemed to discard all of these standards. But Szarkowski found the work compelling, rich and full of life. Primarily the life that Winogrand had managed to photographically capture within the limits of the medium. Szarkowski called Winogrand the central photographer of his generation because he was challenging photographic ideas that other photographers of that time didn't even know existed. When Szarkowski came across William Eggleston's work, nobody else had even heard of him. Maria Morris Hamburg, the curator of photographs at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, was in the room with Szarkowski when he was selecting Eggleston's pictures. She asked him why he had chosen this image and what it meant to him. Szarkowski replied that he was drawn to the simple but complete affectionate connection that the man had with the airplane.
First picture in the guide is one of those wonderful fawn-colored dogs drinking out of a muddy puddle in the middle of a more or less fawn-colored dirt road, and his pink tongue and that muddy puddle and that beautiful smooth. I mean, it is so luxurious. It is so physical. It's not an invention having to do with color relationships. It's the real world, and it's a real photograph. And Eggleston learned what the specific subject was that related to the whole big, broad subject matter of his life, his place, his part of the world, in terms of photographs in color. He figured out where to point the camera.
Ansel Adams was also horrified that Szarkowski was promoting, in his mind, such meaningless work. It was a really brave move of him to show this work. The exhibition was described by one critic as one of the worst shows of the year. When Szarkowski retired, he returned to his first love, taking photographs. They were quiet pictures. Mr. Bristol's Barn was the first book of his own images that he had produced since a publication exposing the architecture of Louis Sullivan. It similarly explores the interplays between architecture and history. A number of factors collided around the time of his retirement. It's been said that photography as a definable art medium quickly ceased to exist. The battle to elevate photography and to gain its acceptance ironically led to its fragmentation. Photography became submerged within the broad church of art. It became meshed with conceptual assemblies, performance art, and mixed media painting. In time, it was colonized by the art industrial complex. That's to borrow a term from Robert Adams. It's impossible now to trace a specific direction within photography. One can argue about Szarkowski's photographic opinions and choices, but his primary point of departure for all his curations and writings was the photographs themselves, as well as what they revealed about photographers. It's become so easy to create photographs. Photographers can now be manufactured and branded by galleries to fit a purpose. Instant curators are churned out by colleges and universities, and without any real understanding of the medium, they are provided with a stage to perform. The music industry has suffered a similar fate. It's become possible to create music without understanding music theory or even how to play an instrument. Although on the surface it seems the new photographic world offers limitless opportunities for creativity, I believe it's extremely unlikely that Szarkowski would approve. Thanks for staying with me, and I'll see you next time. Please like, subscribe, and all those things, share. Cheers.
Towards the end of his tenure, when manipulated photography, stage-managed photography became more visible, people started to take potshots at him because he wasn't responding to that stuff. My view as a photographer was that most of the critics, all they wanted to do was interpret something. Oh, what the photographer means is this, and tell a little story. John wasn't interested in those little narratives. I don't think he felt that photography could really carry a narrative. And many of these people who criticized him were proponents of that kind of work precisely because that kind of work requires interpretation. And that's not what photography is only about, interpreting someone's ideas. Who's to say what a photograph means?